My name is Madison Quinn, and on September 10th, my father shoved me down the staircase of the house where I grew up. He said it the same way someone might comment on the weather, that I was being selfish. That family meant doing the right thing for my brother. I remember the coffee stain on his sleeve, the smell of burnt toast still clinging to his shirt, and the way his hands didn't shake when he reached for me. I was holding the envelope he'd pushed across the table minutes earlier, the one he said would fix everything if I just signed. He stood in front of me on the landing, eyes cold, voice perfectly steady. "You've had your turn, Maddie," he said. Like we were talking about a parking space, not a life. My mother, Lorraine, hovered in the doorway pretending not to hear, while my brother Derek sat silent in the corner, tapping his knee so hard the sound filled the room. My father's fingers dug into my shoulders as he hissed. "All I asked was for you to do what's fair." I said I was done being fair to people who never were. The next moment broke open like glass. He shoved, hard enough that my feet lost balance, and the air left my chest in a single sound I didn't recognize as mine. I grabbed the railing with one hand, the metal biting into my palm, and my back slammed against the steps. The world tilted, the hallway lights spinning above me. My arm went numb from wrist to elbow, but I stayed upright, half crouched on the stairs, staring up at him. Marcus was already there before I could speak, pulling me to my feet. His voice low and sharp, "We're leaving." My father's face barely changed, only a flicker of annoyance crossing his features as if we'd interrupted his schedule. I could still hear my heartbeat in my ears when Marcus guided me toward the door, my body shaking but my voice steady enough to say one thing over my shoulder. I told him I wasn't signing anything. And, for the first time, he looked unsure of what to say. When I was a kid, fairness in the Quinn house was something you learned to live without. Derek got the new red pickup when he turned 16. I got his old mountain bike with a crooked handlebar that dragged left like it was trying to escape the driveway. My father said the bike would build character, then handed Derek the keys with a smile that felt like a ceremony. Lorraine clapped and took photos while I stood on the curb, pretending I didn't mind the rust. The pattern never changed. When Derek's gambling debts started piling up, they sold my old SUV to help him get back on track, though I still needed it to get to work. I'd saved 3 years for that car, skipped vacations, and packed lunch in paper bags until the steering wheel was finally mine. But it was gone in a weekend. My father shrugged and said, "You're more responsible. You'll recover faster." As if being dependable was a punishment I had chosen. They paid Derek's college tuition in full. But when it was my turn, they said the family couldn't afford 2 degrees at once. I took out student loans, worked nights in a dental lab, and sent checks while my father bragged about Derek's potential. When I asked what made him so sure, he didn't hesitate. "Some people are built for more." That line landed like a verdict, quiet and final, and I stopped asking questions after that. Even as an adult, the hierarchy never shifted. Derek moved back home after his second bankruptcy, and my parents called it helping him rebuild. When I visited, my mother would pull me aside and whisper that I should be proud to support my brother's recovery. I wanted to tell her I wasn't proud. I was tired. In their version of love, one child was always worth saving, and the other was just the proof that sacrifice looked respectable. The invitation came on a Sunday afternoon, written in my father's clipped voice over the phone. He said there would be a family discussion about my grandmother's estate, and everyone needed to be there. When I asked what it was about, he said, "It's time we settle responsibilities." The kind of phrase that always meant someone else would be losing something. Marcus offered to come with me, but I told him I wanted to hear it myself before deciding what it meant. When I walked into the house that evening, Derek was already seated, shoulders slumped but wearing a tie like it might fix his reputation. My father stood at the head of the table and announced, Beatrice's condition has worsened. I'm her legal representative now. And it's only fair that the inheritance go to the child who needs it most. My mother's voice followed softly. Your brother is trying to rebuild. You have Marcus. A job. Stability. Derek has nothing, I said. And whose fault is that supposed to be? But no one answered. My father opened a folder and slid papers across the table. There's no need to argue. I just need your acknowledgement. I looked at him and asked, You mean my signature? He smiled. That patient. Practiced expression that always came before the guilt. This is about family. Maddie. Doing what's right. I pushed the folder back toward him and said I'd think about it, though every word tasted like metal. When we left, my mother called after me. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Marcus took my hand without saying anything, and the sound of the front door closing behind us felt heavier than it ever had before. The call came 2 weeks later while I was on my lunch break at the lab. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. A Portland area code I didn't recognize. And when I answered, the voice on the other end was calm and professional. My name is Patrice Long, she said. I'm a nurse at Rosewood Assisted Living. I'm calling about your grandmother, Beatrice Quinn. I almost dropped the phone because no one had spoken her name to me in years without lowering their voice. Patrice said she'd found my number on an old contact form and hoped she wasn't overstepping. Your grandmother asked me to call you. She wanted me to tell you she's fine. I told her that couldn't be right. That Beatrice had advanced dementia and could barely recognize anyone. There was a pause. And then Patrice said quietly, That's not what I've seen. She told me Beatrice ran the Tuesday Scrabble group, read novels out loud to other residents, and had once corrected a staff member's math during medication inventory. I said my father told us she was confused and paranoid, that she accused him of stealing. Patrice hesitated before answering. She did say that. Yes, but she was specific. Dates. Amounts. Property details. It didn't sound like confusion to me. The words came evenly. The kind nurses use when they know something is wrong but have to say it carefully. I asked how long she'd been there. 6 months, she said. Long enough to know your grandmother's mind is sharp. I think someone's been trying to make people believe otherwise. When I hung up, the sandwich on my desk had gone untouched, and the air in the room felt thinner. My father's voice from that dinner, she's not capable of managing her affairs, kept looping in my head until it sounded like a line from a play I'd seen too many times. I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone and knew that if what Patrice said was true, the story my family had built around Beatrice was about to fall apart piece by piece. When I walked into room 22B, she was sitting by the window with a crossword book open on her lap. Her voice was clear before I could even introduce myself. You took long enough, she said. And when I answered, Grandma, it's Maddie. She smiled without hesitation. I know who you are. They told me I wouldn't remember. But they've been wrong about plenty. I sat down and asked if she knew what my father had been telling everyone. And she said, That I'm senile, paranoid, and forgetful. I've heard the script. I asked her if she remembered signing any new trust papers. And she gave a small laugh. Victor hired a lawyer named Glenn Fisk. Some man who kept calling me dear. He said it was routine. But nothing about it was routine. She pointed to a folder on the side table. He added a clause about a grandchild raising a minor child getting 70% in the family house. He thought Derek and Janelle would have a baby before you did. I told her Derek's marriage had fallen apart months before my daughter was born. And she said, Then the game he rigged turned on him. Serves him right. I asked her how long she'd known something was wrong. And she said, Since the day my rent checks started shrinking, I kept track. Every one. I built those houses myself. And suddenly the deposits didn't match the tenants' payments. Her hands tightened around the edge of the crossword book. He thinks because I'm old. I can't count. I've been counting longer than he's been lying. I asked if she wanted me to help fix it. And she looked straight at me. No. Madison, I want us to fix it. We talked for over an hour about bank statements, property deeds, and the way he'd filed power of attorney without telling anyone. I told her Patrice was the one who called me. And she nodded. That woman sees what others ignore. Keep her close. When I stood to leave, she said, bring your records. Bring your patience. And don't let him make you small. He's already used up every lie he had. I promised her I'd come back tomorrow. And she said, tomorrow's good. We've wasted enough time believing him. The first person I called after leaving Rosewood was Samuel Dyer, the attorney who had drafted my grandmother's original trust. He sounded surprised when I introduced myself, but listened quietly until I said my father's name. I remember Victor, he said. He dismissed me 2 years ago without explanation. I suspected something was off. But he claimed your grandmother could no longer manage her affairs. I told him she'd just beaten 3 other residents at Scrabble and quoted a page number from a mystery novel. And there was a long pause before he said, then we have work to do. When I arrived at his office the next morning, he already had a file spread across his desk. This is the original trust, he said, tapping the papers. 50-50 split between you and Derek. No conditions. I handed him the copy my father had made me review during that dinner. Samuel scanned the first page, frowned, and said, this isn't a revision. It's a replacement. He used a power of attorney to authorize changes he wasn't legally entitled to make. I asked if that could be undone. And he said, if we can prove Beatrice is of sound mind, yes. And if we can show he profited, that's fraud. We spent the rest of the day gathering everything we could trace. Patrice helped access Beatrice's financial records through the facility's computer. While I compiled property tax statements and rental histories, the deposits showed a clear pattern: about $8,400 in expected monthly rent, but only $3,200 deposited into Beatrice's accounts. The missing $5,200 reappeared under my father's personal account number. When Samuel saw the spreadsheet, he said, that's over $180,000 in 3 years. It's more than theft, it's exploitation. I asked what came next. And he said, documentation, medical confirmation, and a formal report to the district attorney. Dr. Salazar, a geriatric specialist, met with Beatrice 2 days later. I waited in the hallway while she performed the assessment. And when she came out, she said, your grandmother scored in the normal range for cognition. No dementia. No confusion. Just age. Samuel took her report and added it to the growing folder on his desk. This, he said, is the proof that everything your father built is about to fall apart. I looked at the stack of papers, the lines of numbers and signatures, and realized the case against him wasn't going to be emotional, it was going to be arithmetic. When I walked into the courthouse lobby, my father was already there, pacing near the marble columns with a folder tucked under his arm. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, his voice carried the same authority it always had. You didn't have to make this a spectacle. Maddie, he said, we could have handled this quietly. Like family. I told him the time for family ended the day he forged our grandmother's signature. And he laughed under his breath, saying, you have no idea how the world works. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. All you've done is embarrass yourself. These things take power. Connections. Not accusations from a lab technician. I said the district attorney would decide what it took. Not him. His jaw tightened. And before he could respond, Samuel walked in. holding a single envelope. "Mr. Quinn," he said evenly, "you're here for your mother's competency hearing. She's already submitted her statement." My father's head snapped toward him. "What statement?" he asked. And Samuel replied, "The one where she revokes your power of attorney and names Madison as executor of her estate." The air shifted when Beatrice appeared at the entrance with Patrice beside her, cane tapping steadily against the floor. My father's face went pale. And he said, "They told me you were too ill to travel," she answered. "They told you what you wanted to hear." He tried to reach for her hand, but she stopped him. "You locked me away to steal what I built. I remember every dollar, every lie, and every visit that never came," he whispered. "Mom, you don't understand." But she cut him off with, "I understand better than you ever did." Samuel opened the envelope and placed it on the clerk's desk. "This includes financial records, medical evaluations, and the original trust," he said. My father's voice cracked when he muttered, "You can't prove intent." Beatrice looked at him and said, "Intent is the only thing you ever had." He tried to speak again, but the words broke apart before leaving his mouth. The clerk signed the receipt, stamped the date, and handed a copy back to Samuel. My father's shoulders dropped as if the sound of that stamp had taken the last bit of ground from under him. When it was done, Beatrice turned to me and said, "Take care of what's left. Maddie, I've had my say." My father stood motionless while the others left, his voice following me in a quiet rasp. "You think you've won," he said. I told him, "No, I just stopped losing." Then I walked out of the courthouse into the gray Portland light, knowing he finally understood what it meant to have no control left to take. 4 days after the hearing, detectives from the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office arrived at my parents' house with a warrant. My father opened the door in his robe, still believing he could talk his way through anything. One officer said, "Victor Quinn, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly adult, forgery, and fraud." My father's only reply was, "You don't understand." But the handcuffs answered for him. They led him down the walkway past the hedges my mother used to trim every Saturday. And for once, no one came outside to watch. The money he'd siphoned, $187,000, was documented down to the last transfer. Samuel handled the restitution filings, and the college terminated my father's employment within a week. My mother tried to reason with investigators at first, insisting she'd only followed instructions. But the joint account in her maiden name told another story. When they asked why she hadn't questioned the monthly deposits, she said, "He told me it was a tax adjustment." The officer replied, "Ma'am, ignorance isn't a defense." She accepted a plea deal for conspiracy to commit theft and received probation, community service, and an order to repay $34,000. Derek didn't face charges, but Beatrice made sure his inheritance came with conditions. She told him, "You'll complete a 90-day rehab program before seeing a cent. Fail, and it goes to charity." He nodded like he understood, though no one could tell if he meant it. I haven't spoken to him since that day, but I heard he checked into a facility near Bend. Beatrice took back control of her properties, moved into a smaller apartment overlooking the river, and told me, "I want peace more than space." She still runs Scrabble night every Tuesday, keeping score in neat columns. When the paperwork settled, Samuel divided the estate the way it was originally written. I inherited half and used it as a down payment on a house in Beaverton with Marcus. On our first morning there, I made coffee in a kitchen that was finally ours. And he said, "You did it." I told him, "No, she did," meaning my grandmother. But he shook his head. "You both did." Beatrice calls every Sunday to check on us, always asking if we've fixed the squeaky back door. I tell her not yet. And she laughs, saying, "Leave it, it keeps you humble." Sometimes I think about that courthouse stamp, the sound that ended everything my father controlled. It wasn't dramatic, just a thud of ink on paper, but it marked the exact second our lives split from his. He lost his freedom, and I found mine in the quiet that followed. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it reminded you that truth doesn't fade when someone tries to bury it, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Every time you share your voice here, you help someone else find theirs again. Thank you for staying until the end of my story. If it reached you in some quiet way, subscribe before you leave and tell me where you're listening from. Every comment here keeps this space alive. One truth shared at a time. I'll see you in the next story soon.